autumn. But the name of the talk is Transformational Processes in Baha'i Communities and Cooperative Development are Intrinsically Linked. And so, you know, I think all of us, I think most of us in the webinar are Baha'i, I think, right? If not, it's okay. If there's some explanation about, you know, the Baha'i faith, we're ready to do that. But I think most of us know, I mean, in Baha'i communities, that really we are engaged in development processes in the Baha'i communities, and they're very much community level development activities around the world in all the countries, and it's quite a universal system. And so here I'm going to try to discuss today why cooperative activities and cooperative development is something that is really quite closely linked to Baha'i activities, and probably even to the point where, you know, although, you know, in Baha'i communities, we all, you know, we can talk about the technical, we can talk about the spiritual, but we also have to talk about how we can, you know, how we can take care of ourselves and our families and our schools, and to be able to work in the current environment. And so this is why the cooperative activities is really very much linked to other Baha'i activities. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but certainly any Baha'i community that I can think of around the world, you know, the one issue that we all have in the Baha'i communities is how do we live today? And it is so when in the context of the coronavirus, of course, right now, nobody really knows, at least I don't know, you know, where things are going now. And I'll talk a lot about that in different ways as we go. So when we talk about agriculture, let's say a few things quickly. You know, I want to talk about the future. I don't want to talk about the past. We can maybe bring up the past, but I want to say, where are we going with that? I think we all know that agriculture is, in the Baha'i faith, considered one of the first things that in Baha'i communities, from the words of Baha'u'llah. But the future of agriculture, where is it going, and how does the Baha'i community, you know, see the future of agriculture? I think it's really important. Quite frankly, during my Baha'i life, you know, I rarely run across Baha'i communities that are really very much involved in agriculture. Until, I mean, recently, when I certainly hear a lot more people talking about it and thinking about it. And so, but when we look at agriculture today, and we look at the degree of corporate agriculture, and we hear, you know, the issues of the destruction of soils, the genetics issues, the ecology issues, and all of the issues that we know are impacting on agriculture today, you know, we must see that these things are something that are going to require attention. And personally, I do believe the Baha'i community should be spending a lot more time thinking about these things. But if we look at the current, you know, situation of agriculture, and we talk about the consolidation of agriculture, even the word that I would probably want to use, the monopolization of agriculture, you know, with the changing of the antitrust laws that took away kind of like the competition and grouped all of these agricultural companies into one huge, you know, multinational corporations that really have taken over a large part of agricultural production around the world, not just in North America, also in Europe, in Ukraine, you know, where I've tried to do differently. You know, all these things are so important. Of course, we know that one of the sustainable development goals is about ending hunger. This is so important to the world today and in the coming 10 to 20 years. I tell my daughter, I say, listen, you know, you have to think about where you're going to be in 20 years, because it's likely that the world as we know it today is going to be quite a bit different than in 20 years' time, because of the climate change, because of the different aspects that we have to deal with. But if we talk about, you know, food production in the coming decades, you know, we know that, for example, even today in 2020, 750 million, maybe to 800 million, they say nearly 1 in 10 people in the world is is really exposed to severe levels of food insecurity today, and it is projected to get considerably worse in the coming 2 decades. It seems to me that these are issues that really somehow we need to be able to do more than just talk about, what can be done. We have to stop talking about it and thinking about what can we do to begin to take action. I usually joke about this, but my wife thinks I tell very bad jokes. But my joke would be something to the effect of, let's not wait until the sky falls to decide what to do, because it looks like the sky is going to fall. And maybe we need to do a little bit before some of these things happen, to be ready for it and be ready to move into the future. We can continue on things like pandemic and other things. I did get involved in a Baha'i International Community webinar a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the food security. And in this, I talked a lot about some of the work that I've done in what we call community-led programs. It didn't always used to be in terms of development activities. That community-led was the paradigm that people working in development, would think that way. We had to start thinking differently in the past, let's say 10 plus years, that we don't go into a community and tell them what to do. We found that, as the world has developed in the last, 20, 30, 50 years, that's not a good strategy. We need to be able to empower the communities themselves to lead programs and to make decisions about themselves. And we as development specialists can, of course, provide support to communities to develop, but we shouldn't be telling them what to do, because our experience is, over the years, is that this was not the best strategy. So during this particular discussion, I said, when we talk about food, we need to talk about where production and marketing of food, should be done in the local community, for the local community, and contributing to the local community. And actually, this is very, very linked to what, in my mind, Baha'i development activities, as well as Baha'i community development. And the other thing we can say here is that, when we see the way agriculture, in the corporate agriculture and the different processes that are taking place around the world, that particular production activities of agriculture is, as we all know, creating major problems for the planet, anything from climate change to environmental issues. But one way or the other, we need to switch to some other kind of paradigm. And so the question is, what will that new paradigm look like? Well, okay, as a Baha'i, I think all of us may think, well, how do we know what the future is going to be? I mean, we do have certain principles from the Baha'i faith that we can live by. We have certain principles that our founders have given to us. But that doesn't necessarily mean that how we're going to apply these principles going forward into the future. That's a question I think that we all have. And so, but I've always worked, on smallholders throughout the 45 years I've done development activities around the world. I'm technically background in agriculture. I'm also business background because I did an MBA a number of years ago. And so when I think about, agriculture and the communities in rural areas, I combine both the technical and the business aspects. I think you need to combine both in some kind of a systemic relationship, because, I mean, yeah, we can talk about how nice it would be if we practice more regenerative agriculture or agroforestry or whatever it is that we should be doing today. That's very good, and that's correct. But at the same time, we have to know that communities have to live, they have to produce their own food, they have to have their own income, and they have to have ways in which they can support their communities from both a financial and just a living aspect. So let me go to the next slide here, if I can make it work. Yes, how about that one? Okay, let's try it here. There we go. Now, as I said, we're talking about both community development and cooperative development. I'm trying to make the point that these two things can be quite linked. And so let's look back to when the four-year plan started in 1996. You know, the Universal House of Justice started talking about bottom-up or grassroots programs of growth focused on community development, you know, at the neighborhood level. And so for many years, this has been the paradigm of the Baha'i community. And of course, it is the paradigm, I think, now and going into the future, is these kinds of programs at the community level. But at the same time, we hear from other Baha'i institutions like the BIC that, you know, spirituality and development is very much an important aspect to, you know, the ability to work effectively in communities. And so when we talk about cooperatives, you know, one of the things that we found through the years is that cooperative development has kind of lost a little bit of its attraction in many parts of the world. And one of the main reasons that this happened was because the inability really of communities to find agreement, to be able to work together, to be able to devise systems that would be good for the community, both individually and collectively. Oftentimes governments got involved with cooperative programs, and they kind of had certain dictates to the cooperative programs that has never been very successful around the world, at least in my experience. Or oftentimes you find some very charismatic kind of individual in a rural community, whether it's in Africa or any place really, that, you know, wants to put together a kind of a cooperative activity. But in the end of the day, these charismatic people become, you know, quite dominant in these kinds of cooperatives, and oftentimes there would be some corruption also within the cooperative, where some of the people would take over some of the activities in terms of the financial activities and use them for their own personal development. So there were lots of problems over the last, let's say 40 years, that's quite frankly, lots of problems where cooperative development didn't work very well for various reasons. And the main reasons why in my opinion, why they're not working very well was because of the values of the people that were involved in the cooperative, and of course the ability for them to consult, to find group decisions, to work for the benefit of all, and everything else. And so here we come where I'd want to give a little bit of example. You know, of course, in the Baha'i faith, we all know that Abdu'l-Bahá is our example, the kind of life that we want to live, and how he has showed us, and we all know that, and we live by it, I think. And so, well, Abdu'l-Bahá really, I mean, there was what we call a village storehouse, and this was done, you know, in, of course, Palestine, after he, you know, the Holy Family moved to Palestine, to Akka. And Abdu'l-Bahá started what we call a storehouse. And in this storehouse, I have a bit of a problem. So he started a village storehouse, which in current terminology, we're talking about something that we probably call a cooperative today. Svetlana. Okay, and so I need to get something to drink. So 1 second, I'm trying to see if I can organize it. My wife must be in the shower. Okay, but anyway, let's just say that Abdu'l-Bahá had started what we call a village cooperative, and it had multiple revenue streams. There was a kind of a tax in there. There was a income variation within the group was reduced. And within this particular activity, not only was there agricultural things, but they also included activities related to business, social activities, even schools, health, the needy, and other things. So again, as an example, Abdu'l-Bahá really showed an example to what kind of a rural community can work together effectively. And in fact, it worked so well together effectively that Abdu'l-Bahá received a knighthood for the work that he did in this village storehouse, you know, during, you know, in Palestine at that point in time. And we can compare actually Abdu'l-Bahá's village storehouse with what we might call a rural cooperative. And I don't know how many of you know the name of Raiffeisen. Well, we in Europe, we all know Raiffeisen, but he was a very well-known individual in the middle of the 19th century who created rural cooperatives in Europe. And again, let's look at them again. These are mutual self-help groups. They were self-reliant, self-administrative, and multiple revenue streams. Excuse me for 1 second. Дорогая, ты можешь принести мне вода? Я не могу говорить. Okay, спасибо, пока. Просто вода. Okay, so anyway, so this can be both like a business type cooperative. It could be a financial cooperatives. Members can pool their money with joint liability. Of course, in these cooperatives, the goal is not to maximize profits. And of course, both in the Baha'i concept of the village storehouse, as well as the Raiffeisen rural cooperatives in Europe, you know, there was a lot of religious and moral conviction that were integral to the concept of a cooperative. And in fact, these became did well in Europe. And in fact, cooperatives are still very strong throughout Europe, and also I think in the United States and Canada. I know more recently about Europe because I've been living here for a while. And these, for example, we have cooperative banks in Europe, which are you know, are not corporate banks. They're cooperative banks. Again, they are owned and managed by the members of the cooperative. And we can talk a little bit about what this means if anybody's interested as we go ahead. But the point I'm really trying to make here is that cooperatives are a very valid and an example that even Abdu'l-Bahá showed us during his lifetime as something that works very effectively. Quickly turning to just some background, again, from the Baha'i community point of view. Back in, many of you may know, of course, Paul Hanley, that he edited a book, The Spirit of Agriculture, back in 2005, about 15 years ago. I wrote a chapter of that book at that point in time. I met Paul. Of course, he went on to start with the book 11, and then recently in the Baha'i world, he wrote an article called "Begin with the Village: The Baha'i Approach to Rural Development." But anyway, Paul and I have for years have worked together in the Wilmette Institute and in other different ways, and really both the Spirit of Agriculture and 11 really combine some of the issues that agriculture have, because again, it's not just about growing food. There's a very large interactive system when we're talking about agriculture and how it operates in the world today. I can give examples just from my own personal experience where in the 70s when I was working and in the 80s when I was working in North Carolina State University, for example, at that point in time, a lot of the research that was done for varietal improvement was not using any kind of genetic, transformational type activities at that point in time. Maybe there were some people who were looking at it, but not much was being done. And it was all done really in the university, and there was a Seedsmen's Association, of which I was part of at the time, that was actually producing seeds locally and selling them. And there weren't, I mean, there was some business involved here, but at the same time, it was not the way things have changed today. When again, the various input suppliers of agriculture have consolidated into large corporations, and a lot of the different activities have moved from out of the land grant universities, which were done really on a kind of not really on a profit basis, but more or less on a non-profit basis, to organizations that can develop um, organizations that become more business oriented and are looking for profit in the short run. And so, you know, within the Baha'i community, of course, Paul writes, first, the imperative is to live in harmony with the environment at a time when humanity faces a growing ecological and climate crisis. I think we all say this is true. This is what we need to do. I don't think there's much disagreement on that. At least I don't think so. If there is, we can talk about it. But you know, when I read something like that these days, and you hear it often, you hear these kinds of statements often, I think, well, yeah, okay, that's very good. We can talk about what needs to be done, you know, but the question for me remains is what can we do and how should we start doing things, not tomorrow, I mean, not next year or 10 years from now, but actually what can we start doing today to face some of these issues that are really practically in our face around the world, not just in Ukraine, but the United States and other places. The spiritual principle that material wealth is not an end in itself, rather than wealth is at the center of development. Even when we talk about agricultural production and you know, most of the let's say family farms in the United States and the ones that still exist here in Ukraine, you know, they have really been co-opted, if you will, by the corporate agriculturalists in terms of, you know, providing the inputs for their production and even the markets by which they can sell their production. So they're very much almost turned into kind of semi-sharecroppers. A lot of these agriculture producers around the world, in many countries, even in India and other countries, you know, in South Asia, for example, whereby, you know, they in order to, they have to stay in business. I mean, they obviously have to, you know, have to produce and sell and receive income so that they're able to take care of their families and take care of their farm. But they're very much at the mercy in many cases to some of these large global corporates that are really taking over much of agriculture, all the way from, let's say, inputs in terms of production inputs, all the way through even the markets for retail products. And okay, when we can move to sustainable development of agriculture, helps humanity to live in harmony with the natural environment. Well, sustainable development, okay, let's close our eyes and think what, you know, what comes to mind immediately when we think about that. Well, there's so many things that come to my mind immediately. There's climate, of course. I can even tell you, I can even talk about how things are changing climate-wise here in Ukraine. Within the last 15 years and 18 years that I've lived here in Ukraine, the difference in for example, winters is considerable. I mean, this fall, I think the actual temperature was probably 10 degrees Celsius warmer than it usually is, you know, over the past 30, 40, 50 years. So we can see that places in northern parts of Ukraine, which are, you know, are able to produce crops that they couldn't produce earlier because it was too colder there. And the southern part of Ukraine, we have less rainfall and we're having more problems, and we have to implement some kind of irrigation systems enabled to keep this production up. So in every country, I mean, we're seeing that the climate is changing, the circumstances for producing food is changing, the principle of how, you know, our rural areas are being controlled by whether oligarchs, which is the case here in Ukraine, or large corporations. All of these things are impacting on our agricultural world today, and what can we do about them? Of course, finally, the Training Institute, again, getting back to the ability to make a cooperative that was really quite a self-help type organization that was doing well maybe in the 19th and early parts of the 20th centuries, which has turned recently into an organization that has not been proven very effective in the last, let's say, 20 years. And in fact, for example, in India, I was working in India, and we really didn't really support too many of the agricultural cooperatives in India in the last 20 years. But we started instead working with what we call agricultural groups that could could behave as a cooperative, but not within the, let's say, the legality of the cooperation in India, because the legal cooperation was beginning to impact negatively on the communities that are working in agriculture, in these agricultural cooperatives in India. But if the group could come together and find agreement and find unity and the ability to work, for each other with self-help, then these organizations began to work, and those were kinds of organizations that we were developing in the last 10 or 15 years in India. So, what is a cooperative? Let's make this easy. I'm not going to spend a lot of time really going in and saying how to start a cooperative or anything else. We can talk about it if anybody wants. But let's say, let's just give for me, a very straightforward definition. A cooperative is a private business organization that is owned and controlled by the people who use its products, supplies, or services. And so it's a business, plain and simple. A cooperative is a business, but it's a business that has a different, let's say, perspective, a different orientation, and a different goal. And it's not a business, for example, like if we talk about a lot of the corporate businesses in much of the world, we see that, even the salaries of people in businesses have now become skewed, where some of the CEOs are making 30 or 40 times the amount of income as, some of the workers in the business, or the businesses are not providing sufficient, let's say, in today's world, sufficient, let's say, health services, providing certain sufficient support so that the children can have good places to be cared for, by the employees of a particular business. The cooperative is going to be reoriented not so much on profits in the next quarter, which seems to be the major, let's say, orientation of businesses in many parts of the world, to actually working for the people and for their families and for the communities in which they live. It's a completely different style of let's say, conceptualization about how to operate a business, even though if we look at a lot of things about the business between a cooperative and any other private business, a lot is very similar. I mean, the same accounting system has to be used, the same probably bank structures need to be used, and many of the training and maybe even some of the products are the same, but it has a different orientation, completely different than what we see in much of the private businesses today that are not cooperative and are in fact even seemingly I would even say that many businesses today are okay. I'll just say something that was in the news recently. I mean, Amazon is being criticized regularly in the news today, isn't it? For the way that it's treating its employees. I mean, it's like people are saying, how is it that this company that is just is pulling in millions and millions of dollars, a business, it can't even, provide sufficient, let's say, health support and health insurance to the workers and other things of this nature? How is that possible? It doesn't seem right. And I think it doesn't seem right to me. But anyway, I mean, that is not particularly Amazon. There's lots of organizations that are working in that way. But cooperatives is a business, again, it is a business like other businesses, but historically it has worked for the interest of the less powerful members of society, the farmers, the producers, the workers, the consumers, whatever. And they have found that if they work collectively, they could accomplish much more than they can accomplish individually. And that's a point that I want to make about agriculture and some of the, let's say, activities in the agricultural sector that I'm hearing in different places where people talk about, okay, regenerative agriculture, let's say agroforestry and everything else. These are all wonderful and extremely correct technically proposals. But in my opinion, if these are individuals who are dealing it in this way, it's going to be very hard in many places around the world to be able to work and a sufficient enough income to be able to operate their business, their family, to grow and to take care of their communities too at the same time. So I think very strongly that in many cases, either you're going to be co-opted by the corporate world in various places in the agricultural sector, or you can group together and work together and maybe have enough strength in that manner that you can actually stay competitive and stay active in the world. Okay, there's many different kinds of cooperatives. I think this is I hope that this is most everybody knows this. I just want to pull it out and say, it really doesn't matter really what they're called as far as I'm concerned. The way that they are structured and the way that they operate are quite similar, and the principles of their operation. But anything from agricultural cooperatives to food cooperatives, they're all there. Even insurance cooperatives. And so student cooperatives, utility cooperatives, I think childcare, preschool cooperatives. I mean, for me, I think these are all activities that seem to be closely correlated to the way that Baha'is are thinking in their communities and the ways in which we can respond to the needs of our communities. I mean, I think any Baha'i community, at least from my perspective, any Baha'i community is really feels that, we should care about other people in our community. And if we go back to the example of Abdu'l-Bahá in the village storehouse, of course, if you didn't have enough in a village storehouse, then it was the responsibility of the management of the village storehouse at that point in time to provide support to that individual who didn't have enough, whether it's food or whatever, for their lives. And so in all of these cooperatives, this is a very common situation. And when we look at the world today, particularly with the coronavirus, and we see people literally almost being thrown out of their house onto the streets, having to go to food warehouses or whatever they're called in the States to collect enough food to be able to feed their family, to not be able to go to work because their children can't, have to stay home and can't go to school. There's so many things that are going on that's making life so difficult. And maybe, of course, maybe there will be, we will come out of this pandemic in the next, 6 months or 9 months or a year. But will we go back to where we were before the pandemic? Many people would think not. My personal hope is that we do not, because going back is not really going to solve, the problems that we're faced with in the world today.
A question?
Go right ahead, please.
One thing I was wondering, a while back, they had a seed saving group in the Netherlands that they were collecting seeds from all over the world. And due to climate change, they had a flood in their seed bank. I heard about that, but I never heard beyond that whether they lost anything or whether they saved it or what happened. Have you heard about that at all?
No, but I know. But let me put it this way: there are many food banks. I mean, I think, and some people think there's only a few, like one in the Netherlands. The Netherlands, Netherlands is one of the best. By the way, I had a Dutch passport until they took it away from me. The Netherlands decided about a couple of years ago that if you have more than one passport and you're not living in the Netherlands, that they're going to take away your Dutch passport. But I was Dutch for 15 years, and the Dutch have collected seeds from all over the world throughout history, practically, whether it's flowers and vegetables or whether it's other activities. But I do not believe. I mean, I'd have to check to verify it, that even though there would be some floods in the Netherlands, I would highly doubt that they lost their seed stocks, because this is something that they've spent a lot of time on, and they've been doing so for literally hundreds of years.
I think it was Norway where that happened.
Yeah, it can happen in Norway, but okay, there are seed banks in the United States, there are seed banks in Canada, there are seed banks in Japan, many of the CGIAR, the International Agriculture Institutes, have seed banks around the world. People are collecting seed banks everywhere, and they are conserved, and it is a science. I mean, I was involved in that science for some years. I haven't done it for quite some time. Whether or not, you know, all the seeds, you know, from ancient times have been preserved or not, I mean, I really can't directly say to that, but I can say that people have been collecting seeds and storing them and taking care of them for literally hundreds of years, and I think they still are. But the question is for me anyway, is not so much whether or not there are seed banks, but my question now is whether or not we understand that you know, we should should have enough genetic diversity in the crops and the plants that we are utilizing around the world, so that we can maintain, you know, different the quality of the crops, as well as the quality of the food or whatever that's being produced. Because so often we see that many of the activities in seeds around the world has reduced the genetic diversity of these crops to a much too small, much too narrow of diversity, and that of course can lead to significant problems in the world, you know, because of disease or other issues. And as we look at climate change and seeds, you know, again, looking just in Ukraine, but we can look all over the United States, I'm sure, in the same way, you know. I mean, there are places in Ukraine where the seed varieties that have been grown here for maybe 20 years are not doing well anymore because the climate is changing. It's becoming a bit drier in certain parts, or the temperature is changing, it's becoming a bit hotter. And so, you know, seeds are a major issue. And okay, we are doing seed banks, but are we as a planet really properly utilizing these seeds to take care of the genetic diversity, you know, that we need for the planet? Yeah.
I have a real quick comment. You said don't tell them what to do when you talked about empowering community. A good example of that is I heard on NPR, I heard an interview of a farmer who had gone to Tibet to show them how to grow crops.
Yeah.
And he walked out on the field, and the first thing he noticed was that the Tibetans were putting rocks on the field. And he said, "What are they doing?" He said, "We take rocks off the field. Why are they putting rocks on the field?" And the man that was with him, the interpreter, said, "Well, just wait and please observe what happens before you make any comments." So he said, "Okay, I'll do that." So they came back the next week where they put all these black rocks, and the snow had melted 8 feet around each rock. Came back 2 weeks later, and it's melted 16 feet around each rock. And there was no snow on the field. There was snow everywhere else except where that field was, where they put the rock.
Yeah.
He said, "Now do you understand?" He goes, "Yeah." So
yeah.
Thank you.
And I think we're hearing a lot of that today. I mean, I grew up, of course, I studied agriculture in the land grant universities in the United States, as well as other places. And you know, we took a very scientific approach to how we dealt with issues relating to soil or fertility or varieties or for the, you know, or nutritional for the crops, or the various different activities, you know, that were involved with production. And you know, we're to a certain degree these days, I mean, agricultural scientists are a bit criticized because we kind of didn't pay attention to the more traditional aspects of agriculture. Maybe that's true, but personally, I don't think so. I mean, we did study the traditional things, and it may very well be that these traditional things were not exploited, you know, like we know they should have been exploited, not necessarily because we didn't know about them. It was more, the reason is more primarily, I would say, again, that we start talking about the necessity to work within a let's say a system by which making significant profits became an overriding factor, more important, for example, than soil sustainability or soil reducing soil erosion, everything else. I mean, we studied many years, how to properly set up a field, to reduce erosion so that there would not be erosion. Yet at the same time, we saw over the years that this training and these systems were not utilized, as if we didn't know that this was the main thing that needed to be done.
Gary?
Yes, ma'am.
This is Winnie. You might want to look in the chat. There's some other questions in there as well.
Okay, maybe I will look in the chat. Thank you very much. I will try to do that. If someone wants to just jump right in, that is also fine. And okay, there's 10. There's a lot of them. Okay, so let me see if I can look at some of these. So, click on the right-hand corner between gallery, there is a double line, Our question in Lesotho concerns. Okay, I'm not sure. Our question in Lesotho is concerned with this question. What is that one?
You were talking about food security.
Yeah, I've worked in Lesotho, but some time ago, but are you talking about, the future of food, or the current situation in Lesotho, or?
No, we actually have a project that we started there, working with the community, based on the idea of using natural resources, like extracting the leaves to produce a food supplement for the underweight children and mothers, plus agriculture part around where the plants with the leaves to be extracted will be grown, plus other vegetables. It's like you're saying, it's the community involvement and people working together part that's the challenge right now, that we're trying to move forward.
That's great. I fully agree with you. And I can't remember exactly, but the main thing I was doing in Lesotho was actually on the seed industry. I think I drafted a seed industry law. Hopefully it was something good. Quanta, Fika, what was your question, Fika?
I was wondering if the seeds that gone through the process of GMO, did they also keep the original seeds?
Probably not. I mean, maybe they're somewhere back in the. I mean, in the seed bank, they probably still existed. Yes, but the main thing for the GMOs, again, this is the difference, by the way, between Europe and the United States. GMOs are not allowed in Europe. GMOs are allowed in the United States, and I believe even in dealing with China, I don't know, Arthur, maybe you know about this. I don't think China also allows GMOs. So since we in Ukraine didn't used to grow corn, for example, but now we're growing quite a bit of corn across the street from my house here, where the farm is. Not my corn, but we are selling this corn to China because I think it's not GMO corn. Same with soybeans, but there's a lot of these GMO things is a question that we really don't know where this is going to go. But certainly the GMOs, are very much in the hands of these large, global corporates that have developed them, and they have developed them in such a way that you kind of put a farmer who utilizes these GMO varieties in a position where they have to buy these expensive varieties. They have to buy the inputs for these expensive varieties, and of course, even all the way through the production, and then even the sale of these crops, is more or less in the context of these large multinational conglomerates, which are controlling really much of the agriculture in many places of the world. And so, I mean, the big question is, are GMOs good? And that question, of course, Europeans say, no, they're not good. Americans say, oh, they're no big problem. We fight about that one. But it is something that, as we go forward in the world, the question is, whether we should even be using GMOs. Is that a good idea? are not.
There's also a question about, from Elga, can we turn the franchise concept to cooperatives?
No, I don't think so. I think a franchise, to me, it's just a normal business. In fact, in many ways, it's a again, I mean, a franchise. I don't really know. Each franchise is a little bit different from the way it's organized, but typically, the investment of the company is done by individual investors, and these individual investors, and then either own the company, or if they sell shares in the company, through the shares they control the company. So the company is then not controlled by the members in a franchise, as I understand it anyway. It is controlled by the owners of the company, or those who the shareholders of the company.
But there are also organizations that use human labor, and they're also franchise. I call organizations, they're actually corporations that do that exploits human labor, and they continue to do so.
Well, okay. I mean, I didn't really know exactly, but when you say exploit, I mean, I understand that this again is not, it's not member managed. It's not member owned. It's somehow being managed and owned by someone that has the power to do these, to exploit people. Is that what you mean?
Well, they call it the what is it called? Contracting, for instance. The subcontracting company, or the privatization of some of the government entities, get people to, even Amazon, like you mentioned yourself, in a way it's a franchise, because now it is recruiting people to pay for their own warehouse, hire their own people, and then pay franchise money to Amazon, and then Amazon doesn't anything except just gets franchise fee from them, and they exploit their employees. That's a franchise.
Yeah. So, but these, okay, but anyway, to me, a franchise is a business. What you're talking about is a business, and it's even, we often call them, what you're describing now to me is also called a gig worker in the United States. But, okay, but anyway, shall we continue to go down, do a few more slides, or any other questions we deal with now, or what?
I have to go, but I wanted, Gary, just to let you know the November 25th letter from the Universal House of Justice can somehow be incorporated to what you're talking about.
Okay.
Maybe your future plan.
Sounds good. Yeah,
I'm going to have to go also.
All right.
It's
okay.
good to see you. Say hi
you.
to Svetlana.
I will do so. Missing you here. Take care. Okay, so anyway, in going back to the slides, in a cooperative, it's again, you don't have a system with share markets or with owners, and you don't have a system that works with commercial banks. And so one of the things about cooperatives that I like to say is that the power is not concentrated in a few hands. That's quite a bit different than in a cooperative system, right? So going forward, I'm going to talk a little bit now about money. Now, this may be a little bit strange, but it is, as far as I'm concerned, also in the situation of related to cooperatives, because there are things like cooperative banks. And so let's talk a little bit about banks that are not cooperatives, right? And so talk a little bit about the United States. Here's a little bit of a history. Okay, I'm getting an echo. That probably means that somebody needs to turn off their sound. So anyway, if we look at the history of the banking sector in the United States, which impacted on the entire world actually, prior to 1913, of course, there were private banks and there was no central bank, what we call today a Federal Reserve. But one of the things that I think many of us really don't understand is really that, you know, that governments, when we talk about money, governments really only create a relatively small amount of the money that we utilize in business and in circulation. And they can make a little bit of profit by printing this money, but that's relatively insignificant. Private banks in the United States and in many places around the world create the vast majority of money, about 97% of it. And they do this by creating loans, which is debt. And debt in a bank, in a banking system in the United States is the same as money. And so when an individual like you or me make a deposit into a commercial bank, these consumer deposits become the legal ownership actually of the bank, and they can actually use that money in whatever way they want to and make a profit. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. It used to be, you know, that money was connected to, let's say, a gold standard. It was, these dollars were represented so much in terms of gold. It was the gold standard. This was, of course, stopped by President Nixon back in the 70s. But until recently, banks were required to have a reserve requirement for those deposits. But now, even now, they're not required to maintain a reserve requirement. And in recent years, something new has been taking place in the banking sector is what we call qualitative easing. And this is where a central bank literally creates money out of basically thin air in order to issue loans directly to the banking sector. This is not me making things up. This is boilerplate. We don't hear too much about this, but the question is, how is this impacting the world in which we live, and how does it even impact, you know, rural development and going forward into the future? And so I'm going to start talking about that a little bit as we go forward. So here is something that I don't know if anybody really thinks about these days. I know that used to be in the United States that the politicians used to talk about public debt as being something that was terrible, you know. And you know, and so it was always, you know, something that should not be done. And if we look at this graph, we can go back to 1990 and we can see the public debt was relatively small. Well, guess what? Look at where it's gone over the last, since 1990 up to 2020, 30 years. We can see that it has gone much higher over time. And you can see even in 2020, this huge jump towards upwards. And with the current situation in the United States and in the world today, we're going to see that jump continue to go up. And now the big question that I got for anybody, maybe it's just a question we can talk about. When we talk about public debt of the United States, you know, who pays for that debt? Can anybody tell me? I mean, do you know how that debt is going to be paid for? Does anybody want to comment about that? Well, let's just say that debt is going to be paid for by you, by the American public, through taxes and through other things. So, you know, the question is, we can see that the public debt has been increasing drastically. And so both basically, the public debt is now equal to about 100% of what we call the gross domestic product. And so it's never been that way until recently. But it is there now, and it's probably going to be over 100% of the gross domestic product, you know, after 2020 because of the pandemic.
Where's the point? Excuse me, but where's the point where it collapses?
You mean there was one collapse in 2007. Mm-hmm. You can see where it starts to go up from there again. And well, I think well, the collapse is that's a good question. I mean, we did have a problem in 2007, but we came out of it by the central bank actually doing what's called quantitative easing, and injecting money into the system, which increased the debt of the United States, but you know, that debt, you know, has to be paid. So what happens now? Well, that many people believe that if we have another issue like what happened in 2007 and 2008, they won't be able to be able to solve it in the same way as they did in 2007 and 2008. Now, I don't really want to spend a huge amount of time talking about this, and I'm not really a total expert in this. I can give you some ways, some things that can be read about this, and we can understand it. But the main thing I want to talk about here and why it's important in cooperatives is because there are different ways of doing this. You know, and I do think we have to say that, you know, there could be issues related to public debt, and there could be a crash. And I'm not going to predict a crash, but I'm not going to predict that a crash does not happen, because it very well could happen. And there are people who are saying that, you know, in different places today. Everybody knows that when we talk about the crash of 2006 and 2007, which impacted the entire world quite realistically. It impacted Europe and it impacted Ukraine. It's even still impacting Europe and Ukraine, that particular crash, you know. But
you know where they got part of the money for that was from co-ops, co-op banks, but no one knows about that.
Those co-op banks did what?
Gave them money. They came and asked them for money, and they gave them money.
They
But now
helped.
they got to pay all that back.
Yeah, so so they help. So the other cooperative banks, well, because they're managed in a completely different way, the cooperative banks, they can make decisions to help their members. They can make decisions to help their communities, and so that they are operative. They are operative in a completely different mental framework than a commercial bank. I can talk mostly about cooperative banks. These are called credit unions in the United States.
Right.
But in the cooperative banks or the credit unions, basically they have a different mentality than a commercial bank. The cooperative banks in Europe, which in almost all the countries, there are cooperative banks, good cooperative banks that have been there for over 150 years. They are the banks that primarily lend money to agriculture, and they primarily lend money to small and medium businesses. The commercial banks go after the big boys. They go after the big projects, you know, where they can make a lot more money than the smaller loans that they give in the cooperative banks to small and medium businesses and agriculturalists. So again, the cooperative banks, it is like a cooperative business of any kind. It is a kind of a democratic process where the members actually vote for the management, and the management, of course, is working for the members, and they can do more than just lend money. They can do training of their members. They can help even create, for example, grain storage facilities, you know, that's owned by the cooperative bank that farmers can use, so they don't have to invest in their own facilities, for example. And then it becomes kind of a member organization that's helping with these kinds of activities that make their lives, you know, much more reasonable, because people are cooperating, they're helping each other, and it's one community, and it's not just, you know, everybody looking out for themselves. So these cooperative banks are really also, I mean, to me, equally important as the cooperative businesses that I was talking about earlier, which is why I wanted to compare these cooperative banks to, you know, the system that's happening in the world with the central banks and, of course, the corporate banks around the world. Now let's talk about something else. Has anybody ever heard of the Bank of North Dakota? Okay, probably not, because I've never been to North Dakota either. Well, I've driven through it by a car, but that's about it. But essentially, it's a government-owned and operated entity. It's not a privately owned bank like most of the banks in the United States. It's a government-owned and operated entity. And actually, only the state of North Dakota had such a bank. And this particular bank didn't really operate like a private bank. It was offering more fair banking services to the citizens of North Dakota that private banks either couldn't or wouldn't. because they didn't make enough money doing it. They were making more money doing other things, right? So the Bank of North Dakota potentially insulating individuals from loans and lenders from out-of-state interest, right? These are businessmen, that's what they do. And so the local bank kind of protects the local let's say, citizens of North Dakota from some of the, let's say, Wall Street banks that are really after a profit. And so it potentially insulating you from loans, lenders, from out-of-state interests that people who won't or don't listen to the concerns of the local economy. So in a way, these government-owned public banks they're not cooperative banks, but they're much more interested in the local community than, many of the corporate banks and the Wall Street banks, for example, that we see in the United States today. And just to go a little bit further down along that line, well, here, I just took this, imagine a public bank opens a bank account for each resident, and it's a free digital bank account, and suddenly you don't have to be in connection with the commercial bank accounts and the commercial banking systems. In other words, this is kind of a banking, these public banks are a little bit out of the typical market system, which is really, again, oriented primarily on, making profits, particularly in the next quarter. In many of these commercial banks, whether it's in the United States or it's in Europe, it doesn't really matter, or other parts of the world. But, some of these public banks can be different. And in fact, not only that, it seems that the Californians seem to say, well, these North Dakotians, it's not such a bad idea after all. And so in about, I think, 2016, there's been established what's called the Californian Public Banking Alliance. It's a coalition of public banking activists in California for socially and environmentally responsible city and regional public banks. Okay, so again, these are banks which handle public money, city money, state money, transit, water, school district money, whatever, and keeping this money out of the hands of Wall Street. And the banks in Wall Street can, of course, utilize this money in various ways. They can put it into derivatives. They can invest it in fossil fuels. They can invest it in fracking. They can invest it in a lot of different ways that we don't want that money to be invested anymore. But these public banks are not going to be doing that because they're going to be thinking about the benefits to the community. And so even these public banks in Dakotas, in California, maybe in some other states now, I think there's also some of these public banks in Italy I've read about. This obviously has a major implication for rural areas, not just for the country as a whole. But when we talk about Wall Street banks, let's be a little bit critical here, because I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be, but I am. These Wall Street or corporate banks, we all know that there was, that there have been demonstrations against the operations of these banks. The crash of 2007, 2008, where, many people lost their homes, but these Wall Street banks did not lose anything. They seem to have actually increased their profits during this period. I mean, really, there's a lot of things during this period that many people are very angry about, even today. Yet the power that these banks have, they're too big to fail, and they continue to be supported by many people in the what do you say, the oligarchs, the 1% in the United States. These corporate banks can own and control the money which they have, and they can use it to finance whatever they want, including harmful industries, private prisons, immigrant detention centers, weapons manufacturers, fossil fuel pipelines, others that prioritize corporate profit over the people and the planet. And so these too big to fail banks will also engage in all the risky and fraudulent practices that crashed the global economy in 2008. Most people are saying that today, these corporate banks, are really behaving in not dissimilarly, in very similar ways as to which they were behaving before the crash in 2007 and 2008, which is quite frankly a little bit scary in many ways. But let's go to one other thing about money, because money, I think, is the point that I'm trying to get to here about cooperatives and working together in communities. There are even people who are saying, you know, there's different ways of doing this. You know, there's a group that's called they create what's called a circle, and the circle is kind of a basic income, let's say, cooperative group that's made to promote local economy within your community. And so in a circle, where you can have, well, they're using bitcoins and other kinds of currency, not necessarily, you know, dollars or euros or whatever, but a way that can be traded within the group. It's unconditional, it's people-powered, and it's decentralized. So the point that I really want to make here is that when we talk about, let's say, rural development, agriculture development, we have to think also not only about, you know, how we're going to grow these crops, how we're going to take care of the soils and the environment, how we're going to take care of making sure that the quality of the food is good, but also how are we going to operate these communities, you know, so that they can be economically viable and live in a good way where they're not being controlled by powerful interest in the banking sector, or of course powerful interest in the corporate agricultural sector, you know. And I think these are possible, and I think we beginning to see in the United States and different places around the world that these co-ops, both you know, whether they're business co-ops or that they are banking co-ops or banking groups, you know, they are growing in different places around the world. And for me, quite frankly, I mean, this is kind of getting close to the end. Quite frankly, these are, for me, a future that we can talk about and believe that that might be the future. I'm not going to say 101% that's the future, but I am going to say, but that is a future that I think that sounds reasonable and logical to me. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that, you know, after I shut up in a couple of minutes here. So just reading again, co-ops are committed. Co-ops, all co-ops, whether it's a commercial bank or whether it, I mean, a commercial co-op, I mean, a banking co-op or a business type co-op, they're committed to meeting social goals, such as healthcare. Guess what? Isn't that an awful thing in the United States today? It's awful. Elder care is awful. I mean, how many people, what were they saying? I read somewhere something like 60 or 70, 80% of the people dying from the coronavirus are in the nursing homes, something ridiculous. Social services, workforce integration, former prisoners, you know. Anyway, all of these cooperatives are able to blend market activity with social services provisioning and democratic participation all in one swoop. And by the way, that's exactly what Abdu'l-Bahá did in the village storehouse. You know, and so this was an example that Abdu'l-Bahá gave us. So why don't we listen to it? So, you know, in many ways, these co-ops can deliver services much more efficiently than many conventional businesses. They're more adaptable, they're more responsive to community programs. And so the inclusive participation to members, the members can decide for themselves in their local communities what their needs are, how are they going to be met. And so, you know, these things are so wonderful sounding to me. I can say, that's what I want. That's what I want, you know, in my village here, which I would very much try to develop. And I give lectures about it and I try to work on it. But of course, you know, the world is still not going in that direction. Okay, this is just a wrap-up slide, just to say that, you know, the world in which we live in, if we look at the donut, this is so-called donut economics. You know, on the right-hand side, we can see, you know, on on these red things going outwards. These are the existential threats to our environment that are growing. You can see they're growing in different ways. But the arrow going towards the center are the things that we need in terms of our social foundations for our society, whether it be for schooling or energy or water or food or health or whatever. So we see that, you know, it is also quite empty if we look at the statistics, you know, for the kinds of things that communities need to be strong and effective. they're underdeveloped, and on the outward side of the donut, we're seeing the overdevelopment of different things that is destroying our planet. So that's why we, on the left-hand side, we talk about figuring out ways to be regenerative in their activities, to restore, you know, the activities in our communities, to get away from these centralized activities to more distributed type activities. And so we would like to be regenerative by design, and of course distributive by design as we look going forward. And I think these, from many of the academic and scientific and even activist communities, these have become rather common statements these days. And the question for me is, okay, they're common statements, but we got to work a lot harder, you know, before we get to bring these things into our environment. And I'm really quite often like to say that I don't believe in little steps anymore. I don't think little steps are going to save the planet. I think there's going to be some rather fundamental transformational changes that are required, you know, if we're going to really move out of the current crisis which the country and the world has today into the future, you know, world order that we all anticipate and believe in. And so that's all from my talk.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gary.
Great, Gary.
In the chat, there's a question from Elga. Elga, do you want to ask your question about federal deposit protection?
Yeah, I was just wondering how that plays out. The federal, I forgot the acronym, FDIC.
Yes,
Deposit Insurance. Yeah, FDIC.
Yes, federal insurance. Yes, how does it play out with the cooperative banks? Because I know in Cameroon, for example, all the cooperatives have to be linked with the federal derivative bank.
Yes.
You know, for that protection. So how does that work?
I mean, as far as I know, and okay, I'm not the world expert on this. I know something about these things. I did work in banks, but mostly I worked at the client level with a bank, particularly in agricultural regions. But all banks, really, in almost all the countries, do have a linkage with the central banks. And so I just give an example from Iraq. For example, I'm doing a program now that local banks give loans to small and medium businesses. But the local banks often do not have sufficient liquidity to do that. I can give reasons why in Iraq it's that way. They don't necessarily have sufficient liquidity, but liquidity is available to a local bank from the central bank. And so there is always a connection between the central bank and local banks, whether it's a cooperative bank or not. In most countries, a cooperative bank is actually under the same banking legislation. Maybe there's some small differences, additional, let's say, points for a cooperative bank, but essentially they all work within the same, let's say, clearing system of a bank and many of the same rules and regulations of the bank. The difference is not so much, again, they're both banks. The difference is more or less in the management of the bank and the goals of the bank. And that's the difference between a cooperative bank and a public bank and the normal corporate banks. Give you another example. Most of the, let's say, private banks that are not cooperative, right? They probably lend, I mean, in many cases, for example, in banks I was talking to recently in Iraq, I say, how much of your loans are being made to the small and medium businesses? They say, oh, it's about 5% of the portfolio. I said, that's awful. I said, that's not enough. Do you realize how difficult it is for people in Iraq to be able to develop their businesses, their food systems and everything else? They need this support. And they say, yeah, we know, but, and they have all their excuses. And so we are trying to operate so these banks will increase their lending to small and medium businesses up to 15 or 20% of their portfolio. But okay, I can give you a lot of reasons how to do that. It's sometimes it's not so easy, but that help comes from the central bank, and so the central bank is involved in working with banks, and the rules and regulations are often the same whether it's a cooperative bank or a central bank or a corporate bank, but it's mostly I mean, the central bank is perfectly happy. In fact, in Iraq, the central bank wants local banks to give loans to small and medium businesses in the agriculture sector. They want that to take place. And so they're going to do what they can to support the local banks to do that by providing liquidity and other support. But it has to be developed, and that's what we do in these development activities. So, I mean, it may be different in different countries, but that's as I understand it, that's the case. But the federal deposit, just to go with FDIC of the United States, for all of you who haven't studied history about this, after World War II in the Bretton Woods conference, when the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and other institutions were formed, it was agreed by the countries after World War II that the central bank of the United States became the kind of the central bank, for the world, for the planet. That is no longer the case. Countries like China and Russia don't like this, and they'd like to set up a different system. But for the most part, the central bank of the United States is still very much linked to central banks in other countries around the world, and so their policies are quite similar. Gershuni. Linda, you're there? I don't see you.
That's Sandy.
Oh, okay, Sandy.
Linda should be there too somewhere.
What was your question?
I have a question. I also put up a comment about fundraising on the global giving site that we're going to be doing for the Lesotho project. That's part of the question, actually, is it's good to have a cooperative and everything be covered by the activities of people, like selling the supplement and selling the agriculture products. But there's certain things like project manager salaries that I personally haven't figured out how to cover. So this is our fundraiser. But I have another question. That the first time that I went to South Africa and presented about Village Storehouse, the question that someone threw at me was, well, how can you do this kind of system if some people are lazy and others work hard? And I don't know how I would answer that one.
Well, then I go back to what I said in the beginning, quite frankly. It's true that in many places around the world, cooperative banking and cooperative groups did not work, let's say, in the last 30 or 40 years in many countries. And the reason was that the culture of okay, let me give an example. Here in Ukraine, the ex-Soviet Union, I live on a cooperative farm, right? Yeah, but you know what? Mr. Stalin changed cooperative rules, from being a bottom-up type organization to a top-down type organization. And so, the rules and the cultures of the countries around the world didn't allow for this collaborative, and community building activities, so that these cooperative activities can be successful. But and so that's why I say that in a Baha'i community, that's what we do. We are building communities by which we can learn to talk to each other, cooperate with each other, understand that we have certain challenges, and that in order to deal with these challenges, that we need to deal with them as a community. And so when they ask, like they do in South Africa, well, all these people are so, take more of themselves, the only thing you can answer, I think, is, well, maybe we need to go back and do a few more Ruhi classes. Maybe not literally, but I was joking a little bit, but essentially, a cooperative will not work if there is no, let's say, human solidarity, honesty, openness. As soon as you get into lying and cheating and stealing, well, you can forget it. That cooperative is not going to work. And there's no question about it.
We have actually begun short transformative leadership workshop ideas. So that's going to eventually lead into Ruhi, I think.
Well, it can be Ruhi or it can be some other. I mean, it doesn't even have to be Baha'i. It can be Christian. It can be Mormon. It doesn't really matter. The question is, what kinds of. I mean, we know that the virtues that we have as Baha'is are the same virtues that every religion has, whether you're Islamic or you're Christian or you're Buddhist. It doesn't matter. The virtues are the same, and those virtues are what we need to make a cooperative to work effectively. You do not have to be Baha'i to have a good cooperative, but of course, our Baha'i community development activities are very suitable for building the foundation for cooperatives also, the necessary foundations.
Interesting that you mentioned, I just came from a Ruhi book 13.
Yeah.
Yeah, on social action, it speaks exactly that way. If we don't, we have to change the mindset, our worldview first, to cultures of truthfulness, like you said, and solidarity, and for anything to work. If we don't change that, it won't work.
Agreed.
Exactly. Thank you.
I just wanted to mention, I put in the chat some information about reading groups. One of the things that the
Notes from you.
Association for Baha'i Studies has suggested that we could work on is to begin with some collaboration, would be some reading groups, so that we're getting involved in the discourse outside. So and learning about current topics, what's the discussion on these different issues that are related to agriculture. So it doesn't mean that we all have to read or study the same book. It can be small groups. Anyway, we just decided to start organizing some reading groups. And if you'd like to join, Winnie Merritt has agreed to kind of be the point person for that. So if you're interested, she's not going to lead the reading groups, but she will connect you with others. So if you're interested, just contact her. There are a couple of suggestions already, and she's put some information in the chat there, and her email address is in the chat if you're interested. So one of the books she's holding up there is The Half Has Never Been Told. And so that has to do with the issue of, American capitalism, how it relates to slavery. And then the other topic that people seem to be interested in from our meeting last month was this book by Ralph C. Martin, Food Security. Or it could be others, if there's some other suggestion that you have that you'd like to share.
Well, this is wonderful. That's great. I've read both of them. I've read. Yeah, I've read, and really these are books that we as Americans, I can be an American here for a while. We as Americans, we didn't read these things. We did not learn these things in school, and this is very sad. But we got to bring ourselves up to and we're not getting them. Also, much of this information we're not getting through the mass media either. But there's a lot of really good literature out there that can be read. And so I used to say, this is something that I always said many times, and that when I can't find the quote anymore, but when I was a young Baha'i, I was taught that Shoghi Effendi said something to the effect of, for every Baha'i book we read, we should read 5 non-Baha'i books. We have to get out there. It's not, we can't sit and only read Ruhi in a world that's being battered to death by existential crises. We need to understand what's going on in the climate. We need to understand what's going on with other things, and we need to do Ruhi. And we need to do so much if we really are going to be able to work effectively in the world today. But I mean, and again, when I go back to agriculture, I have so much heard people talk about regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, soil, conservation, seeds, and this, that, and the other. I said, well, technically, that's all very wonderful, but let's talk a little bit. How are people going to live in these communities? How are they going to make it work? How are they going to get together and collaborate? Let's talk a little bit about that, because because individuals, really individual farmers, are not going to make it, you know, typically. So Neil, you're too quiet.
First of all, I've just, during this talk, I joined something called the Eastern Ontario Agri-Food Network. And I really think that this is, if you Google that, you'll see it's free membership this month. They're having their annual general meeting December 10th. But I visited a farm, an organic vegetable farm yesterday, and there's something happening here in Eastern Ontario that is really quite remarkable. On the local agri-food ecosystem. And so I think it's very good that we have feet on the ground. It's always, we have to be in touch. We always have to be connected with a piece of land somewhere. A garden is okay, but a decent piece of farmland is nice. So I'm interested in the idea of farmland trusts, investment trusts. When I visited this farmer, he wanted I've been supporting this farm. It's called Dream Small Farms.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely wonderful, he's a lawyer. He's got this 55-acre property. He's put in hoop greenhouses, and he is such a natural farmer. And so we sort of visited, and my wife painted the farmhouse because it's a 19th century farmhouse, and we gave them some 100 cards for their Christmas. And this year I bought their organic. I bought for Thanksgiving in Canada, which was back a few months ago, I bought 30 Orlop bronze turkeys. And this is a heritage breed of turkeys. And I gave them to the food bank here in Cornwall and to our friends. And I tell you, the gift of these Orlop heritage bronze turkeys just opened up hearts and stomachs in a very good way. But it's this connection with the local food ecosystem I think is so important wherever we are. So when I spoke to him, I was wondering about, I want to buy a stake. I don't just want to be one of his community supported agriculture members, CSA members. I want to have a stake. And he said, well, the farm is open. In the summer, we're going to have activities, families going to come and all this kind of thing. And I think there's untapped potential in city dwellers. They want to buy a little piece of land, but they actually just want to buy a financial stake. So I think there's room to develop new financial instruments for us to buy stake that gives us the right to a little piece of land. So I just wondered what you thought about that idea.
I think you know what I thought about it. I personally believe, and I think some of the people that I'm talking to here in North Carolina also believe that, yeah, we Baha'is, you know, we know, you know, from the writings of Baha'u'llah that agriculture is important to the world and to us as people and as a community. Yeah, but I have not seen this importance to the extent that I would like to see it in the Baha'i world. The more people that we can get into the agricultural sector and away from this consumerism, away from the cities. I don't think these cities are going to be good places to live in the future, personally. Okay, maybe it's just my way of dreaming about the future. But I do think that the more that we can establish really strong communities working together in rural areas and outside of the cities, I think this is more, let's say, a preparation for the transformational changes that we are going to have to go through in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years for this planet to be able to survive. And that's pretty much straightforward. Everybody says that. All the researchers, all the people around, it doesn't matter. The whole world is saying that. Unfortunately, our politicians are still sleeping. Our politicians are still worried about getting the vote, you know, and getting enough money so that they can be voted back into office. And they're not, and so like right now, I mean, maybe I'm not a partisan politician, but I think all Baha'is to certain degrees are political. Everything we do is political. It's just, there's not partisan politics, right? You know, what I can say is we can't deal with another administration. For example, in the United States, the most powerful country in the world in many ways, we can't deal with another administration that keeps playing by the old rules when we know the old rules are going to kill the planet.
Yeah.
You know, and so, I mean, that means that we simply can't sit at home as individuals in the United States or around the world and say, hey, we're going to go. And one thing that we can work on, of course, is agriculture. The other thing we can work on are all the other existential problems like learning how to live with less.
Yeah. I don't know if you know, but Ottawa, the capital of Canada, has 1,000 commercial farms in its jurisdiction due to municipal amalgamation. So the thinking of the municipal council has changed, because now they have to look at, there's not a rural-urban divide, it's a rural-urban cooperative. And this is very exciting. So I think just the idea that the city has to look at its rural hinterland in a symbiotic relationship. And
Absolutely.
so anyway, I just want to share that.
No, I think it's fantastic. And so when we talk about the youth and we talk about young people, and I talk about my daughter, well, what is she going to do? You know, I don't know what to tell her what to do, really. She's interested in a lot of different things and she doesn't know what she wants, but you know, we know we're coming to the age of artificial intelligence, right? How's that going to change the world? According to anything that you're reading anywhere, it's going to significantly change the world that we're going into in ways that are really hard to conceptualize, you know, but we have to start to think about it. So, I mean, we need to talk of young people and say, listen, the way to change the world is not to go out and work for it. Okay, I'll just use Amazon because I just used it earlier. You're not going to go out and work for Amazon and make a lot of money. Because first of all, Amazon doesn't pay their employees in a very reasonable way. We hear about that on the news every day. And by the way, it's not an organization that we really want to see the future. We want a better organization than that thinks more about who we are and how our communities are, and we work together and get rid of all those, those corporations that are really destroying our communities, really, in many ways.
So question for you, Gary. Do you own the land where you're living?
I certainly do. And actually, I keep telling my wife every time, because we're in a rural area here in the old, where there were cooperative farms, a lot of the cooperative owners have kind of either died or they've moved away. And so every time a house around me, becomes available, me and my wife have a big fight about buying that house. Because she says, I don't want another house. I said, don't, just buy it. I have a little bit of money and it doesn't cost very much money. But in the end of the day, I would like to build, something here where we can have even a Bahá'í community, where we can work and live together. It's not just here for children and youth and the work that we're doing now primarily. I want to make it into a real live 100% a community where we meet every morning, for prayers at a local, house of worship, and help each other in ways, the communities should help each other. That's my dream.
Is it a productive farm with acreage?
Ukraine is one of the most productive areas in Europe.
Yeah, but your particular farm.
Well, I'm living on Chernozem, molly soils. I'm living on molly soils. We can grow anything you want here, but I usually just grow lucerne and crops for my horses, and enough vegetables for the kids and my family. So,
Are we welcome there? Are we welcome? Am I welcomed?
Yes, come on.
I'm ready to come.
I got an extra room
I'd like to say something. We really need to wind down probably because we've gone way over, but I mean, it's so interesting. But I did want to mention something. We're people of faith on this. We're not all Baha'is, but if we have a faith community, then we can do something right now. And I want to thank John Bradley, who's on this call, because he is one of the first people that said to me, our LSAs need to get involved in this. And so on Wednesday, the Holy Day, the LSA, the Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of High Point honored Abdu'l-Bahá by putting Arthur Dahl's talk up for people to listen to and then participate in discussion. And there was immediate result. Right while we were going on, our friend Ann here said she got on the her town's website to see what was going on there. And I got feedback from other people. So that's a very simple thing to do. These presentations are on YouTube. Dawn can tell you the websites because it's not a public YouTube presentation. But you can do that in your locality or with your church. Our extension agent here is going to do it. And the person who's in charge of the Greater High Point Food Alliance is going to train the Vista volunteers with it. So those are two people, not Baha'is, but who have like minds. And this is something you could do as well. Thank you.
Absolutely, for sure. And really, we don't, I mean, it may be that, 40, 50 years ago in the Baha'i faith, yeah, we were quite concerned about everybody in the community being Baha'i. That's not the case anymore. Baha'is communities are perfectly happy to have people of many faiths in our community activities, in our meetings, in our activities. And by the way, just I put the picture of my farm up on the screen. You can see where I live.
Nice.
Oh, okay. Judith, are you there?
I think she left.
Muted. Judith?
She's muted.
Right. I was just wanted to mention next month we're going to have Judith Bakiria is going to speak along with some other colleagues. Judith, are you there?
I thought she left.
No, her it's still up here.
Oh, it was on the chat.
Yeah, she's still connected here. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. That's what our plan is for next month. So if you're interested, the last Sunday in December, we're going to be having Judith. I believe, what day is that? Is it the 27th? Something like that.
Judith is unmuted now, so maybe she could say a word.
Yeah, she is unmuted, but she's not responding. So maybe something
What
happened.
what's the talk going to be on?
She's trying. She has a wonderful project. Ned or Janet could tell us about it. They know it well.
Ned, are you there?
Oh,
Yes,
Okay, Janet.
I am here. I'm actually living in the same home as Judith right now. I'll follow up at breakfast time, although we're going to move in with Alan and Angela very shortly. Yes, it's something to tell you different from Africa, that's for sure.
Ned, Judith said her internet is weak, but we can hear you. Can you explain what her the work that she's done already, because it's very impressive. I think people will want to hear.
Well, I don't think I should try and explain it, but it's using a lot of trees for sure and growing the crops under the trees. And you'll hear more about it on December the 27th. And I think Dan will be out here before then as well, so she can help us put it all together, possibly.
It sounds like there was a lot of restoration of land and bringing people together to create income.
Sounds like forest farming too. That's good. Thank you very much.
Okay, I can just say Uganda is a very good place to grow things, at least this part, possibly similar to Ukraine in that respect.
Okay, well, I want to thank Gary. Thank you so much for sharing all your wealth of information with us and experience. You have so much experience in this.
It's it really there's so much that needs to be done, and there's so much that we can do, really. And so Nothing that I like more than to work together with everybody.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Aloha, everybody.
Aloha. Thank you, Gary.
Gary.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much.
Okay. Take
I
care.
love the farm. What a beautiful farm.
So do I.
My wife could do a painting of your farm, Gary.
Yeah.
I'm not joking.
The buildings on the front are actually the dormitory for kids in a schoolhouse. My house is a little bit towards the back, but you can barely see it. But anyway, that's where we are.
Stunning.
Wow, it's beautiful. Yeah, we are certainly coming.
Okay, come.
Learn from you.
Can we get your email?
No problem.
Thank you.
If seriously, I put my email is in the, okay, it's fine.
Oh, is it there?
I'm gonna put it in the chat.
Judith has written for us. She says, at Luceno Fruits and Herbs, we work with smallholder farmers. They integrate seasonal food crops in leguminous and fruit trees.
Thank you.
And Gary, we did have a question. Someone asked about the PowerPoint. I don't know how you feel about sharing your PowerPoint.
I can share it. It's no problem. Just give me send me an email. I just put an email in the chat. Send me an email. I'll send you the PowerPoint. And I've got a lot of other materials also.
Super. Nobody wants to leave.
I really appreciated what Neil was saying about the trusts. Like, we have to be creative and think up better ways of doing things. So farmland investment trusts and Dream Small Farms and having farms as part of the city jurisdiction so that there's more interface between the rural and the city. Those things make me feel happy, you know, that we can make a difference. And one of the co-ops, we have cooperative banks in Vancouver Island a lot. There's the Island Savings, which is basically just Vancouver Island, and Van City is only lending in BC, and they're both cooperative banks.
You know, it's probably not a good idea to get me talking about banks. I'm so angry at the banking system and how it's operating in many places around the world. It's awful, and we really need to recognize that, and we need, I think, again, we're not Cartesian politicians, but I think we as a society, as a world society, have to say that this is not acceptable.
Judith also added some more points for us. She said the smallholder farmers that she works with, I think there's like 126 of them, they've organized themselves into a producer cooperative. So
Individually, it's so obvious that individually, they're not going to be effective. They have to work collectively. And when they work collectively into a cooperative, they can do so much more. And that's wonderful.
Well, okay then.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Okay.